A woman returns to her dangerous neighborhood with nothing but her resolve, determined to survive the night, until a brutal encounter forces her to reveal a deadly skill she's kept hidden for years. But will her past come back to haunt her, or can she change the future of her community once and for all? Nyla Carter's boots struck the cracked pavement with an unyielding rhythm, the sound echoing through the empty streets. The fading light of the evening cast long shadows, stretching out from the dilapidated buildings that lined her path. As she walked, the air grew colder, and the neighborhood, once familiar, felt more menacing with each step. The small streetlights flickered, offering little comfort, but Nyla didn't flinch. She had walked these roads countless times before, and though they were infamous for their danger, they were hers. She belonged here. Her eyes scanned the surroundings, shuttered windows, graffiti-scarred walls, broken glass scattered on the sidewalk. There was a palpable sense of tension in the air, a constant reminder that the area was controlled by groups like Travis's gang. It was a dangerous place for most, but not for Nyla. Her confidence was evident in her stride, a silent declaration that she wasn't afraid. It wasn't arrogance, it was survival. As she passed the corner where two roads intersected, a low murmur broke the night's stillness. It was the sound of voices, harsh, low, and filled with threat. Nyla didn't stop or even look toward the source. She knew they were there, and she knew what they wanted, but she wouldn't give them the satisfaction of an easy target. She took a deep breath, keeping her pace steady, every muscle coiled in readiness. This neighborhood was a constant test, but Nyla had long since learned how to navigate its dangers. She had the skills, the training, and above all, the resolve to face whatever came her way. There was no room for fear when you knew how to fight. The streets may have been hostile, but they couldn't break her. Not here, not ever. Nyla was halfway to her apartment when the shadows seemed to move. From the corner of her eye, she saw the figures materialize, stepping out from the darkness like predators closing in on their prey. There were 4 of them, the usual group, Travis and his gang. They had been watching her for days, waiting for the right moment. Tonight, it seemed, they were ready to strike. "Look what we got here," Travis's voice sliced through the quiet, a malicious sneer evident even in the darkness. "The tough girl walking alone like she owns the place." Nyla's jaw tightened, but she didn't stop. She kept walking, the rhythm of her steps never faltering, her back straight. "Hey!" Travis shouted, taking a step forward. "You think you're better than us? This is our turf, bitch!" The other members of the gang chuckled, circling her like vultures. Their eyes gleamed with the kind of hunger that only those with too much time on their hands and too little to live for could possess. Nyla knew better than to engage with them directly. She kept walking, her eyes scanning the surroundings, calculating. There were no good options for a quick escape here. She had been in tighter spots before, but something told her tonight was different. "Don't ignore us," one of them barked, his voice laced with anger. It was a young man, one of Travis's more unpredictable lackeys. He grabbed her arm, pulling her toward him. Nyla didn't flinch. She glanced at him, her expression cold. Without a word, she twisted her body, using his own momentum to send him stumbling forward. His grip on her arm loosened, and he fell onto the asphalt with a harsh grunt. "Damn it!" Travis growled, his eyes burning with fury. He motioned to the others. "Get her!" In an instant, 2 of the gang members lunged at her. Nyla's body tensed as she sidestepped, narrowly avoiding their hands. She could feel the heat of their breath, their desperation. But she had been trained for this. She had survived worse. "You think you're tough?" one of them sneered, lunging again, trying to pin her down. But Nyla, always the strategist, anticipated his move. She ducked low, using his own weight against him. Her knee shot up, catching him in the stomach, forcing the air from his lungs. Travis snarled in frustration, his face contorting with rage. "You'll regret that, bitch. I swear we'll make you pay for this." Nyla stood tall, finally facing him directly. Her eyes met his with unblinking resolve. "You should have stayed in your hole, Travis," she said, her voice low but firm. "This doesn't end well for you." But even as she spoke, Nyla knew this wasn't over. It was only just beginning, and Travis, humiliated by her quick retaliation, would not rest until he had his revenge. The gang had scattered, their pride bruised and their egos shattered. The 2 men who had lunged at Nyla were now limping away, nursing injuries that would leave them with more than just physical scars. Travis stood at the back of the group, his face red with fury, his eyes never leaving her. "You think this is over?" Travis growled, but there was doubt in his voice. His usual bravado had cracked, and he couldn't hide the fear bubbling beneath the surface. Nyla didn't reply. She didn't need to. Her body was a fortress of controlled aggression, poised but relaxed. She stood her ground, watching them retreat, her mind already racing through the possibilities of what could come next. She was far from finished with them, but she couldn't let herself get too complacent. Travis and his gang disappeared into the night, their retreat marked by angry mutterings. Nyla watched them go, her heartbeat steady, but she knew the calm would be short-lived. They would be back. They always came back. Turning, she continued her walk home, the weight of the encounter settling in. Her breath came in slow, measured inhales. She wasn't shaken. In fact, she felt a strange sense of relief. The attack had been inevitable, but it had also revealed something she hadn't expected. In that brief moment of violence, when her body had reacted instinctively, Nyla had shown just how much she had buried deep within her. She wasn't just some survivor of this neighborhood. She wasn't just a woman trying to make it through the day. Nyla Carter was a fighter, trained to defend, trained to destroy. Her movements had been precise, methodical. No wasted energy, no unnecessary violence, just efficiency. The skills she had honed over years of training had surfaced without hesitation, a powerful reminder of who she truly was. Back at her apartment, Nyla locked the door behind her and leaned against it for a moment. She exhaled deeply, still processing what had happened. The familiar scent of old wood and stale air wrapped around her as she moved toward the kitchen. There, a stack of unopened letters lay on the counter, unimportant, mostly bills. But one envelope caught her attention. It was a letter from her former mentor, Captain Jonas Miller. She hadn't heard from him in months. She opened the letter carefully, reading the words that followed, feeling the weight of the advice he had imparted over the years. His words echoed in her mind as she sat down, the soft glow of the lamp casting a gentle light over the paper. "Remember who you are, Nyla. You carry more than just your own weight. Don't let your past define your future." She closed the letter, the familiar, comforting feeling of his guidance wrapping around her once more. It had been a long time since she'd needed to think about what she was capable of, but tonight had reminded her, and she was ready for whatever came next. The evening dragged on, but Nyla couldn't shake the adrenaline that still pulsed through her veins. She had won the confrontation, but the price of victory lingered in the air. Travis's gang wouldn't forget the humiliation. They would regroup, plot, and come at her harder next time. She knew this wasn't the end. It was merely the beginning of something darker. As she made her way through the hallway of her apartment building, the weight of the world seemed to settle on her shoulders. The distant sounds of car engines and muffled conversations felt distant, disconnected from her reality. She had always known that she would have to fight to survive in this neighborhood, but tonight, she had crossed a line. She had proven herself capable, and that made her both a target and a symbol. Inside her small apartment, Nyla closed the blinds and locked the door behind her. The familiar silence enveloped her as she kicked off her boots and sank into the worn armchair in the corner. The soft glow of a lamp flickered in the corner of the room, casting long shadows against the walls. Her eyes drifted toward the framed photograph on the shelf, a younger version of herself standing next to Captain Jonas Miller. His stern expression in the picture contrasted with the warmth in his eyes, a rare glimpse of his softer side. He had been more than a mentor to her. He had been a father figure, someone who had shaped the woman she had become. A pang of guilt gnawed at her as she thought of the advice he had given her so many times. "Don't forget where you come from, Nyla, but never let it hold you back." His words echoed in her mind like a mantra, a reminder of the burden she carried and the path she had chosen. Her fingers traced the edges of the photograph, but her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden sharp knock on the door. Nyla froze, her instincts kicking in. Who could it be at this hour? Her first thought was Travis's gang, coming back for revenge. But she quickly discarded that idea. No, they wouldn't be this bold. She stood up slowly, making her way to the door with silent steps. She peeked through the peephole and saw a familiar face, Sarah, her neighbor, the one who had watched part of the earlier confrontation from her window. Nyla had seen Sarah around, but they had never spoken much. Sarah had always seemed like an enigma, quiet and observant, never fully part of the chaos of the neighborhood. But tonight, She had witnessed Nyla's fight. Nyla opened the door cautiously, her eyes locking with Sarah's. "You okay?" Sarah asked, her voice gentle but filled with concern. Nyla nodded, offering a small smile. "I'm fine, just not a fan of surprises." Sarah stepped forward, her gaze flicking nervously over Nyla's shoulder as if she expected more trouble to follow. I saw what happened. You really handled them." Nyla didn't respond immediately. She hadn't expected anyone to come to her after the incident. She had made it clear that she didn't need anyone's help. But there was something in Sarah's eyes, something soft, yet resolute, that caught Nyla off guard. "I wanted to make sure you were all right," Sarah said, taking a tentative step inside when Nyla didn't protest. "I've seen how they treat people around here, and after tonight, I think you need someone who's got your back." Nyla glanced at Sarah, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. She had expected judgment, fear, or even pity, but there was none of that. Only genuine concern. It was unexpected, and it disarmed Nyla in a way she wasn't prepared for. "You don't have to worry about me," Nyla replied, her voice low but firm. "I can handle myself." But Sarah wasn't convinced. She gave Nyla a small, almost imperceptible smile. "I know, but sometimes it helps to have someone else watching your back." Nyla studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. Maybe it was time to let someone in. For once, she didn't feel the weight of the world pressing against her alone. As Sarah took a seat on the couch, the door clicked shut behind them, and Nyla allowed herself to relax just a little. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, she wasn't alone. The silence between Nyla and Sarah hung in the air, broken only by the faint hum of the city outside. Nyla had never been one to invite others into her world. She had always preferred solitude, something that came naturally after years of training and a life of constant movement. But as she glanced over at Sarah, sitting on the couch with her hands folded in her lap, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. There was something about Sarah's presence that felt grounding, something steady in a world that so often felt unpredictable. "I didn't expect you to come by," Nyla said, breaking the quiet. She hadn't meant to sound so blunt, but the words had escaped before she could stop them. She shifted in her chair, unsure of how to continue. "I don't exactly make a habit of letting people in." Sarah's eyes softened, the tension in her shoulders easing as she gave a small nod. "I get it," she said quietly, her voice careful but understanding. "I'm not one for getting involved either, but what I saw tonight, what you did, I couldn't just ignore it. It's not every day you see someone handle themselves like that." Nyla studied Sarah for a moment, trying to read her. The woman was no stranger to hardship. Nyla could tell that much. There was something resilient in her, though it hadn't been fully revealed until now. "I'm used to standing up for myself," Nyla replied, her tone even. "I've had to be." Sarah's gaze shifted, a slight frown tugging at her lips. "I've been living here for a while, but I've never seen anyone stand up to them like you did. You really know what you're doing." Nyla didn't respond right away. She didn't want to admit that the fight earlier hadn't been as easy as she made it seem. It had been more than just a confrontation with a gang. It had been a reminder of everything she had buried, a glimpse of the person she had once been before she left it all behind. Her military training, the discipline, the strategy, none of it had been a choice. It had been her life. But now it felt like a distant memory, something she had been running from. "You saw too much tonight," Nyla said quietly. She didn't want Sarah to think she was weak or worse, that she might look at her differently. "You don't know what they're capable of." Sarah met Nyla's gaze, her expression serious. "I've seen enough to know you're not like them. You're not just another person they can push around." There was an honesty in her voice that Nyla couldn't ignore. Sarah wasn't afraid of her, not in the way most people would be. It was disarming. "I'm not afraid of you, Nyla," Sarah added, her voice steady. "And I'm not going anywhere. You're not in this alone." Nyla let the words settle, her chest tightening slightly at the unexpected warmth. It had been so long since someone had spoken to her like this, without judgment or fear. She wasn't used to it. But as the minutes passed, a subtle shift took place. Sarah wasn't just a witness anymore. She was someone Nyla could rely on, even if she wasn't ready to admit it. The air between them had changed, and for the first time that night, Nyla allowed herself to exhale, just a little. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone as she had thought. The hours passed, but Nyla couldn't shake the feeling that the storm was far from over. She had learned long ago that danger rarely came in the form you expected. After the confrontation with Travis's gang, the tension in the air had only thickened. She knew it was only a matter of time before they would try again. And when they did, they would come harder. Travis's pride had been wounded, and pride, as Nyla knew well, was a powerful thing. Nyla sat by the window, watching the dim glow of streetlights stretch across the pavement below. The night was calm, but she could feel the unease settling in her chest. Sarah had left hours ago, leaving behind only the faint echo of her words. Nyla wasn't used to people sticking around, but something about Sarah felt different. There was no agenda, no ulterior motive, just genuine concern. It was a rarity in a place like this, and Nyla didn't know whether to be grateful or suspicious, but there was no time to dwell on it. Her focus had to remain on what was coming next. She knew Travis wouldn't back down, not after what had happened. His reputation had been shattered, and in a neighborhood like this, a bruised ego was a dangerous thing. He would gather his gang, come up with a plan, and return to finish what they had started. Nyla moved to her small kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the room. She grabbed a pen and a scrap of paper, starting to sketch out a plan. It wasn't just about defending herself anymore. It was about taking control of the situation before Travis could strike again. Her mind raced through the possibilities. She had experience in combat, yes, but this wasn't a battlefield. This was her home, and she had something to protect now, something more than her own survival. Nyla's thoughts were interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. Her heart skipped a beat as she reached for the gun tucked beneath her jacket, the familiar weight grounding her. She didn't expect anyone, and she wasn't in the mood for company. She approached the door cautiously, her senses heightened. When she peered through the peephole, she saw Sarah standing on the other side, her expression anxious. Nyla opened the door, the cool night air rushing in as she looked Sarah up and down. "What's going on?" Sarah shifted nervously, her eyes darting to the street behind her. "I think they're planning something. I overheard something. They're getting ready to come after you." Nyla's stomach tightened. She had known it was coming, but hearing it confirmed made it all too real. Travis wasn't wasting any time. "They'll be back soon," Sarah continued, her voice low. "I couldn't just sit by and wait for them to hurt you, or anyone else here." Nyla studied Sarah for a moment, realizing the weight of what she was offering. "You're willing to help?" Sarah nodded, her face set in determination. "I don't know much about fighting, but I can help you figure out a way to stop them before they cause any more damage. I don't want to stand by and watch this happen again." Nyla felt a shift inside her, a sense of resolve settling over her. She had never been one to rely on anyone, but Sarah's willingness to stand with her was a game changer. They weren't in this alone anymore. Together, they might actually stand a chance. "All right," Nyla said, her voice steady. "Let's get to work." The weight of the task ahead hung heavy between them, but there was a new sense of purpose in the air. Nyla had faced danger alone for so long, but now, with Sarah by her side, something had changed. The odds might still be stacked against them, but Nyla wasn't backing down. Not now, not ever. Nyla sat at the small kitchen table, the faint hum of the city outside a constant reminder that time was running out. The plan was taking shape, though it was far from perfect. She had always been one to rely on her instincts, but now she had to balance that with the knowledge that she wasn't alone anymore. Sarah, who had entered this world of danger unknowingly, was now part of the plan, and Nyla couldn't afford to make any missteps. "So we know they're coming," Nyla began, her pen tapping rhythmically on the table. "Travis won't stop until he's gotten his revenge, and his pride won't let him back down. Not after what happened. We can't just wait for them to show up at our door." Sarah nodded, her eyes scanning the papers strewn across the table. She wasn't as familiar with strategy as Nyla, but she had been sharp enough to pick up on the key points. "We need to catch them off guard. If we can get them first, maybe we can stop them before they have a chance to retaliate." Nyla's eyes narrowed as she considered the suggestion. It was a solid idea. The element of surprise had always been one of her strongest tactics, but this wasn't like any mission she had ever been on. This was personal. This was her home, her community. And now, it was Sarah's too. "I'm going to need more than just a few surprise moves," Nyla said, her voice steady but low. "We need to control the environment. I can't take them all head on. If they come in numbers, we'll be outmatched." Sarah leaned forward, her brow furrowed in concentration. What if we set up a perimeter? We can use the alleyways, the abandoned buildings. If we can get a few people to help. People can't help if they don't know what they're doing, Nyla interrupted. We can't afford to involve too many people. The fewer who know what's going on, the better. Sarah hesitated but then nodded, clearly understanding the gravity of the situation. So it's just us? For now, Nyla confirmed. We work with what we have. The air in the room grew thicker as the full weight of the task ahead settled over them. Nyla was used to the cold, calculating nature of military strategy, but this wasn't a battlefield. This was home, and that made everything different. She couldn't fight in the same way, couldn't afford to leave destruction in her wake. There were people here who had already suffered enough. She stood up, walking over to the window to scan the street below. There was a sense of urgency in her movements now, a ticking clock in her mind. You're going to need more than just a plan, Sarah said quietly, her voice breaking through Nyla's focused thoughts. You'll need people who trust you, people who believe in you. Nyla turned to look at Sarah, surprised by the raw sincerity in her tone. What do you mean? I'm not talking about strangers, Sarah continued. I'm talking about the people here, the ones who are tired of living in fear. If you lead them, if you show them they don't have to be afraid, they'll follow you. You don't have to fight this alone. Nyla took in Sarah's words, feeling a shift inside her. She had always been alone in her fights, but maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to be. Maybe this was the chance she had been waiting for, an opportunity to not just survive, but to make a real difference in the community she had spent years avoiding. All right, Nyla said, her voice resolute. We'll get a few people on our side, but I'm not taking any risks, not with this. The two women worked well into the night, finalizing their strategy, setting up escape routes and securing critical locations. The sense of purpose was undeniable now. Nyla had never been one to trust easily, but Sarah's presence, steady and determined, was a reminder that there was strength in numbers. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about taking control. Tomorrow would bring the fight to their doorstep, but they wouldn't be caught off guard. The streets were eerily quiet as night fell, a heavy stillness hanging in the air like the calm before a storm. Nyla stood in the shadows of the alley, her eyes scanning the street, the familiar rush of adrenaline coursing through her veins. She'd spent the entire day setting up the perimeter, communicating silently with those who had agreed to help. The plan was simple: split the gang into smaller groups, take out their leaders, and leave Travis with nowhere to run. She wasn't just going to defend herself, she was going to end this on her terms. Sarah stood beside her, her presence a quiet reassurance. The last few hours had been spent preparing, hiding, and waiting for the perfect moment. It felt strange to have someone by her side in the midst of the chaos, but Sarah had proven herself trustworthy. She wasn't afraid to get involved, and she was smart. That was exactly what Nyla needed. They'll be here soon, Sarah said in a low voice, glancing over at Nyla. Do you think this is enough? The people you've got on your side? Nyla didn't hesitate. We've got the element of surprise, that's all we need. But even as she said it, a sense of doubt lingered in the back of her mind. Travis's gang wasn't just any group of thugs. They were dangerous. They had numbers. And more than that, they had nothing to lose. But Nyla had learned long ago not to let fear control her. She trusted her training, her instincts. And now, for the first time in a long time, she was willing to trust someone else too. A noise broke the silence. A footstep. A whisper in the wind. It was faint, but Nyla's sharp senses caught it. They were coming. Get in position, Nyla ordered quietly, her voice sharp. Sarah nodded and disappeared into the shadows, joining the others who had volunteered to help. It was a risky move, getting others involved, but Nyla had calculated every detail. If they executed this correctly, they would take down the gang without any casualties. The night deepened, and the gang arrived. They moved in clusters, confident, unaware that they were about to walk straight into a trap. Nyla watched them from the darkness, counting each step, each movement. They were getting closer. As they approached the first intersection, Nyla gave the signal. Her allies, positioned strategically throughout the area, sprang into action. The first group of gang members was cut off, trapped between two abandoned buildings. They tried to fight back, but Nyla's team had the advantage. The element of surprise worked like a charm, and before they knew it, the gang members were disarmed and immobilized. Keep moving, Nyla muttered under her breath, her eyes never leaving the scene. She had no time to waste. The next group was closing in. Travis was in the middle of it all, his rage palpable as he shouted orders to his men. Nyla's eyes locked on him from across the street. It was time. She moved with the precision of a predator, stepping out of the shadows and closing the distance between herself and Travis. He didn't see her coming until it was too late. Nyla tackled him to the ground, her movements quick and efficient. She didn't give him a chance to fight back, her knee pressing into his chest as she pinned him down. "You think you can walk all over this neighborhood, Travis?" She spat, her breath coming in sharp bursts. "Not anymore." He struggled beneath her, but his efforts were futile. Nyla knew his strength wouldn't be enough against her. He was a man built on pride, but pride wouldn't save him tonight. "I'm not done with you," Travis hissed, but Nyla wasn't listening anymore. She wasn't going to let him turn her world upside down again. She stood, keeping him on the ground with a firm grip on his arm. Behind her, Sarah and the others had taken care of the rest of the gang members. They were on the ground, their movements sluggish, unable to fight back. The fight was over before it had truly begun. Nyla glanced around, making sure the streets were clear. The neighborhood was quiet again, but it was a different kind of silence now. The tension that had once ruled the area was gone. She had done it. Sarah approached cautiously, her eyes flicking between Nyla and Travis. "Is it really over?" Nyla nodded, her face hard. "For now." But as Travis lay there, his pride shattered and his power stripped away, Nyla knew that this victory was more than just a battle won. It was a message. She had taken control of her life, and no one, not even Travis and his gang, would ever be able to take that from her again. "I'll let you go this time, Travis," Nyla said coldly. "But if you ever come back, you won't get off so easily." She turned her back on him, walking away with Sarah by her side, the weight of what they had accomplished settling in. The neighborhood had changed, and so had she. It was a new beginning for both of them. The sun was barely beginning to rise when Nyla stood on the balcony of her apartment, looking out over the neighborhood. The streets were still, quieter than they had been in days, weeks even. The chaos of the night before felt like a distant memory, but Nyla knew it was a turning point, both for the community and for herself. She had fought to protect her home, to make a stand against those who thought they could control it. But the fight hadn't just been physical. It had forced her to confront parts of herself she had long buried, parts of the soldier she used to be and the woman she was trying to become. Nyla wasn't just a survivor anymore. She was a leader, a force of change in a place that had long been forgotten. And as much as she had always prided herself on her independence, today she realized something she hadn't fully understood before. Her strength didn't have to come from being alone. She could protect this place, this community, with others by her side. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. Sarah. Nyla smiled faintly, knowing who it was without needing to check. "Morning," Sarah said as she entered, a cup of coffee in hand. "I thought you could use this." Nyla took the cup, appreciating the gesture. She had never been one to sit down and relax, but today she felt a strange sense of peace. She had always believed that the only way to truly control her fate was to fight, to keep moving forward. But now she saw the value in stopping, just for a moment, to appreciate the victory.
"You did good," Sarah said, her voice warm but full of admiration. "Last night, it's going to change things. People will see that they don't have to be afraid anymore." Nyla nodded, her gaze returning to the streets below. She knew the fight wasn't over, that there would always be challenges ahead. But for the first time in a long time, she felt like she wasn't fighting alone. "I think you're right," Nyla replied, her voice steady. "Things are changing, and I'm not going anywhere." Sarah smiled, her eyes shining with something Nyla hadn't expected. Hope. For the first time, Nyla could feel it too. The days following the fight were different. There was a calmness in the air, as if the neighborhood itself had taken a deep breath and finally exhaled. Nyla walked the streets with a new sense of purpose, her steps no longer filled with the weight of survival, but with the potential for something more. People no longer glanced nervously as she passed. Instead, they nodded in quiet recognition, acknowledging the shift that had taken place. Nyla stood outside the community center later that afternoon, watching as a group of local kids played basketball in the parking lot. Their laughter carried through the air, a sound she hadn't realized she'd been missing. The neighborhood, once defined by fear and anger, was slowly beginning to change. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Nyla had made sure of that. Behind her, Sarah approached, her hands tucked into her jacket pockets. She had become more than just a neighbor over the past few days. She was someone Nyla trusted, someone who had stood by her side when it mattered most. "You've really done it," Sarah said with a grin, her eyes scanning the scene in front of them. "You've made this place feel different." Nyla's gaze softened as she watched the kids, their carefree energy a stark contrast to the tense atmosphere that had once gripped the streets. "I didn't do it alone," she replied quietly. "This place is strong. It's always been strong. I just had to show them." Sarah smiled. "You showed them that they don't have to be afraid anymore." Nyla nodded, a quiet resolve settling in her chest. She had faced down Travis's gang, but in doing so, she had also faced the deeper fear within herself. The fear of belonging, of trusting others. It was something she had carried with her for far too long. But now, with the neighborhood starting to rebuild and a new sense of unity in the air, Nyla felt something shift inside her. She was ready to stay, to fight not just for herself, but for the people around her. A few blocks away, Travis sat in his dimly lit room, his mind replaying the defeat he had suffered. His pride had been shattered, and he was far from finished. But for now, he was no threat. He was a shadow of his former self, nursing his wounds and contemplating a future that might lead him back to this neighborhood. But Nyla was ready. She would be ready for whatever came next. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the streets, Nyla turned to Sarah, a quiet strength in her eyes. "It's a new beginning." And this time, Nyla wasn't going anywhere. In the end, Nyla's journey reminds us that true strength isn't just about surviving. It's about choosing to stand up, not only for ourselves, but for those around us. Sometimes the hardest battles aren't fought in the streets, but within our own hearts. The courage to trust others, to lead, and to change our own narrative can be more powerful than any physical confrontation. Nyla's transformation from a lone fighter to a community leader shows us that we all have the power to shape our environment as long as we're willing to confront our fears and embrace the change we seek. So, how would you have acted in Nyla's shoes? Would you have stood alone, or would you have reached out to others to change the course of your story? Click on the video now to continue your journey of self-discovery and learn how you can harness your own inner strength. Don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories and take the next step in your personal growth. See you in the next video.